Hey there team, welcome back to the channel, welcome to my overview of Selaco. So for those who want to cross it, I do overviews on this channel. I just look at the first 2 hours of a game. That's the Steam refund window. Steam thinks you can make up your mind in that time. I tend to agree. 20 hours in, I doubt you're going to change your mind, broadly speaking, from what you thought 2 hours in. So I give you the broad strokes info, keep it short and punchy, around 10 minutes, and then send you on your way. You can make up your own mind what you think. So Selaco, straight out of the gate, I will say this. This is one of the best games I've played all year. I would love to dive even deeper. It is early access, but they're doing actually kind of unusual Scarlet approves early access. It's pretty much feature complete. The campaign's all there, from what I understand, from the dev splash. And I think they're going to hit version 1.0 probably like soon, like maybe like in a month or something. So they're kind of soft launching it. They're going to add an epilogue after that. But for the most part, like it's 95% complete. It's just, you know, they're a small studio releasing their first game, super independent. And I think they just want to put it out there and see how it's received and make sure that they bug fix and all that in that opening month or so. I don't hold me to it about months, but that seems to be their philosophy, which I think is brilliant. Very, very clever. Now, interestingly, because you can't really say a game is objectively good, there's a lot of subjective nature to games, but I suppose on the subjective end, you would argue, you know, you could have a bad game kind of objectively, mechanically, but you enjoy it as a guilty pleasure. I would hazard that even if you didn't like playing this game, you would probably realize that this sits on the other end of the scale. So much of its design and mechanics are kind of objectively clever, brilliant. Like, I'm not even necessarily a boomer shooter kind of dude, because I find them all a little bit copy-paste. The only thing that really changes is they might do a bit of a unique, you know, retro art style. But the gunplay is always, you know, it's okay, it's fine. And if you love that stuff, don't take it personally. You're probably eating well. You just keep hoovering up everything 3D Realms churns out, and that's fine. But for me, it's never really enough to hook me or really compel me to come back in. So this game has actually merged so many different things together. It just happens to be sort of, you know, mechanically a boomer shooter. And funnily enough, even saying all that, the gunplay is brilliant compared to its contemporaries. It has a real weight, a heaviness to it. Everything is boof, boof, boof loud, and it's the screen shake. I don't even really understand how you do it, but it's like animation theory. You know, if you make a bouncing blob look better animated, it kind of deforms and warps. There's all this trickery that goes on that you and me, the boring people, don't understand. And whatever they're doing, it is so brilliant. And from what I can tell, like the main selling point, apart from obviously having tight gunplay that works quite well, is kind of similar to what makes Ghost of Tsushima so pretty. Now, not a knock against that game, but that's not exactly super cutting edge graphics. If you've actually played it with hands on and had a look at the textures, and I raised this in my other video, it's okay, it's good, but it's not brilliant. The reason it looks great is because the whole world is in motion, you know, flowing leaves and all that. And I'm not trying to get sidetracked, but I'm giving you a touchstone you might be familiar with. This game, when everything pops off, every bit of glass breaks, shatters, pipes get popped and they blow out smoke, water leaks from the ceiling, shrapnel, and you know, I don't think it's a full voxel system or anything like that. It's not fully destructive, but they've created it so that all of the gunplay contacts, everything is in motion. And it's this chaos that you are just sort of immersed in. And that's what makes this game truly beautiful. The art style is cool, and you know, it has its own retro aesthetic, but again, much like Ghost of Tsushima, when everything's in motion, it makes the world feel so much more alive. Which is pretty wild, because you're essentially that kind of trope of a solo survivor fighting waves of bad guys. You know, it's a bit of an after the fall. It's not like it's a living world, really. It's all quite static. And that arguably helps punctuate the differences as well. That you're in a kind of static bottom of the bathtub curve state when you're moving around, and then when things pop off, everything just starts exploding and moving and flashing, and it's so good as far as actual moment-to-moment immersion. But even talking about mechanics, like just as a quick example, you can't sprint, but you move at a reasonable pace, and you could probably do a whole video on sprint theory and how sprint buttons have kind of wrecked games in a way. Like, there's not really a way to go back. What you do have is you have like a little shift dodge button, and it can be used in many different ways. Like, you can go under obstacles, under half-open doors, things like that. But you can use it in combat as well. And it has a long enough cooldown that you just can't spam it. So it's not like this COD bullshit 13-year-olds on Adderall just flying around, sliding everywhere. So it can't really be abused, but it's actually really quite functional when you need it. Inadvertently, I suppose, highlights the whole problem with the sprint button. It's like, having mobility in a firefight when it's on is very important, but you couldn't take a sprint button off of a person, generally speaking, when they're out of combat moving around, because they will complain and they'll think it's slow. So this game kind of addresses that, and you move at a more deliberate pace through the world. It's very interesting. It's something that's rolled around the back of my head. I've always wondered, how do you stop people sprinting everywhere? Because you give a gamer a tool, they're going to do it, and if you take a sprint button off them, they're going to thumbs down your game for being slow. But that's just one example. Other examples is the fact that it's melding so many different genres together. I've often talked about how survival horror doesn't need horror to work, and arguably the best survival horror games in the business are things like Resident Evil, which arguably aren't really scary. They're just set in a horror setting, but they're not trying to scare the living shit out of you, right? This game has aspects of whatever, divorced from the horror, you would call the mechanical components that make a survival horror like Resident Evil brilliant. Sure, this has some tense moments between firefights and that, but it's not horror themed. And yet they have overt things like they put a bloody safe room in it with a very clear homage tune that sounds like Selaco's version of the Resident Evil safe room themes. And in there, you can take a breather and upgrade weapons and all that. It's not super deep, right? It's not going into, say, the limited inventory management that you would see in a survival horror. But you've got the safe rooms. You've also got a sort of back and forth Metroidvania adjacent, which you see in survival horrors, and that's where it blurs that genre. So you're getting key cards and going back and forth, and when you move between levels, much like something like Doom, your key cards are taken off you. However, you can increase your security clearance through secret areas, and that persists through levels, so you're kind of incentivized to even go back and forth and find those so you can carry forward, because you're trying to get upgrades. There is an almost RPG, but it's doing its own way of leveling your character, in that you can upgrade your weapons through, unlocking milestones, buying them with scrap in the safe room, but also getting actual objective upgrade modules in hidden side areas. None of it is 100% required or necessary, and a lot of it is in fiendishly clever puzzles off the beaten path. One example I will give is there was like an MRI machine, and you could interact with it, and your interaction with buttons in an environment is very limited. So when you get a button to turn on an MRI machine, you pay attention, because it's unusual. And I was like, what's the point of this? And I picked up an office chair. Now, you don't really have physics puzzles. You don't interact with stuff. You can pick crap up and move it and all that. It's there, but you don't really use it for anything other than these unusual puzzles. And I stuck an office chair in the MRI machine and turned it on, and it destroyed itself and blew the wall out, and there's a secret passage behind it. So incredibly clever that most people are not going to even come across that puzzle. And it's using, like I said, interacting with items in the environment, something that the main game doesn't even do, but it's doing that to do a very clever puzzle. Even things like your ammo interplay, your ammo capacities are quite low, I would say, compared to most of these games, and having to switch guns mid-firefight is a big deal, which is great. Your adrenaline's pumping. And how do you know to swap? Because there's some really good audio cues. Your chick will scream out last mag when she's jamming that one in. And it's great. It's such good telegraphing. So you know you're going to have to switch to the pistol. None of the weapons are really bad. They all feel good. But that's the sort of problem you fall into. All these boomer shooters rinse, repeating, copying each other, is that you're just going to get your favorite gun, and you're usually not going to get squeezed that hard for ammo. This is why, the modern Doom and Doom Eternal games are kind of praised so highly, because they tried to shake up that sort of boomer shooter formula with limited ammo and execution kills and sort of interplay, that sort of stuff. And then beyond that, there's these emergent world puzzles that are part of the story as well. I've been given these explosive devices that you have to essentially maneuver to a marked wall, but basically it's introduced interesting and clever environmental puzzle solving, and it waited like an hour or an hour and a half before it even started doing that. It's starting to go a little bit open world. Most of the beginning of the game, you're in a medical facility. It's giving Mad Prey vibes, where you can read little logs and you're trying to figure out what's going on. So yeah, if it sounds like I'm gushing, it's because I am. It's slamming together so many influences and different mechanics, and it's its own thing. To call this just a boomer shooter or a first-person shooter on its own would do it a massive disservice, and yet it doesn't overindulge, which is something you see in so many games. They jam more and more mechanics in because of this false perception of adding more value to the game and trying to justify the price tag. This game has so many clever little bits and pieces taken from genres, and they've only been put in because they fit, because they work. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of crap stayed on the cutting room floor because it just didn't fit in and actually add to the player experience. So yeah, this game is a masterclass in how to make your own thing and goes beyond something like homage. It takes actual inspiration and implements it expertly. So I suggest everyone gets this and plays it, even if you are someone that's not necessarily attracted to this sort of genre, because I would kind of argue, without going too circular, that's someone like myself. I find this space to be kind of boring and very much lacking innovation. And while this isn't exactly revolutionary, it's not creating or inventing new mechanics, it is so delightfully fresh by putting all these other little genre sprinklings into it and making its own thing. Anyway, at this point I'm just gushing. Go get it. One of the best games of the year. Easily. Team, might just leave it there for the time being. I will catch you guys on the next one.